Hey guys, what's up? Another day, another SMSL DAC review. Some of you requested for a SU-9N DAC review and I'm ready to offer my final impressions about it. SU-9N comes as an alternative to the regular SU-9, dropping that MQA decoder, that UAT Bluetooth codec, and of course slashing its price to $400. But when it comes to user experience and sound performance, things went up just a little bit. Okay folks, let's check what's so interesting about it. Long story short, SU-9N looks exactly like their SU-9, and that's a good thing. It looks like a matte black metallic brick milled on a CNC machine with just two panels attached on top and underneath. It uses the same stepped volume knob that offers a decent resistance, and it isn't wobbling at all. That's quite important. A big surprise was seeing a much nicer remote control, so this is a brand new one. It's smaller, it has less buttons, and it just looks more futuristic, more minimalist to me, so it's a really nice upgrade. There are 3 rubber pads under it, and if you have heavier power cords, then it might lean to the right. As usual, SMSL moved most of its screws on its back and under it for a clean minimalist look. Overall, it's the same good old SU-9 case, and I have no complaints with it. As for controls, there's a clean looking front panel which houses a 1.9-inch LCD screen with a tempered glass on top, and there's a volume wheel that works as a mini navigator if you are far away from its remote. On its back you can spot a trio of digital inputs as USB, optical and coaxial, a Bluetooth antenna socket, and of course a set of balanced and single-ended analog outputs. Both of them can offer a fixed or a variable output voltage. As for tech, under its hood we're talking about an ES9038 Pro design that uses at output stage 3 pieces of OPA 1612 op-amps. These are regarded as slightly mellower and more natural sounding, and I believe it was a wise choice putting them in here. MQA is out of the question, and that means the highest performing XMOS receiver wasn't really necessary. The newest Qualcomm Bluetooth chipset hopped on board that supports all the nicest codecs, except for UAT that was reserved only for Huawei devices, so it isn't a big deal for me. I'm spotting a decent AC filtering stage and encapsulated low noise switching mode power supply, the same one you can see in almost all SMSL devices that already proved itself noise-free. Distortion went down and dynamic range went up by a little, but in a real-world scenario I don't think anyone can differentiate the SU-9N from its twin brother SU-9. Okay folks, let's dive in and listen to a lot of tunes. Sound-wise, the highest praise I can give to SMSL and to this particular unit is that it sounds good with every musical genre. And it has such a pleasing tonality that I believe a careful amp matching isn't really an issue anymore. And it seems that SMSL went with the same winning formula that they already applied to its twin brother SU-9 and to its bigger brother VMV-D1SC. And by that I mean a boosted low-end delivery, so its bass is slightly stronger, and that came as a huge surprise considering its tiny size and of course its small capacitance. After connecting it to the firmware and Hypsos power supply, I was surprised that my headphones didn't lack a mid-range presence. Their bass output was a little stronger, the ball frequency response was quite complete top to bottom, there was treble but there weren't any kind of nasty brightness or listening fatigue, at the cost of sounding slightly smaller, so the soundstage wasn't that impressive, it wasn't really enveloping. I felt that musical notes were hitting an imaginary wall at some point, but of course that again shouldn't come as a surprise considering its mid-level status. And of course that legendary detail retrieval that its twin brother was blessed with is still in here, so it wasn't a problem spotting all those small nuances, small subtleties. There are still quite a few limitations, but as a whole I believe SMSL did a fantastic job, and all those technicalities that are important to me weren't botched or overlooked. Preliminary impressions are quite positive, and sincerely it exceeded my expectations. Moving on to Transients, I'm not sure what ritual dances SMSL engineers did around while designing this unit, but clearly it wasn't lacking in terms of speed and bass impact. For example, Kennerton Rognir is quite a shape-shifting headphone, so they could sound slightly mellow, gentle, quite ethereal sounding, or the other way around, they could sound impactful and quite visceral, depending mostly on the amplifier that drives them, but also on the source that feeds that amplifier. So when SU-9N was connected to the firmware and Hipsus power supply, I believe that dynamics just exploded. Bass impact was going much higher, so much so that I needed to lower the volume of my usual electronica music. And I immediately remembered that its twin brother SU-9 was performing more or less the same. SU-9N looks like a natural pugilist to me, so always trying to raise those dynamics while never limiting the speed of sound. In many ways it was meaner sounding, more impactful to entry-level topping and Guster devices. On the other hand, it was a little raw, polished, a little aggressive sounding. So it worked slightly better with modern music and less so with mellow and gentle music, and that was very apparent with blues and jazz, because I couldn't follow a drum solo that was deeper sounding, and sadly it cannot have them all at such a small caliber and affordable price point. Moving on to detail retrieval, I believe that this is easily the most important part a DAC should do, and this is where SU-9N just stood out as being impressive from day one. So the sole job of a DAC is being just correct, really precise when converting those zeros and ones without altering the final outcome, and this is where SU-9N just felt holding its chin up slightly higher than usual. So that ES9038 Pro and those smoother sounding OPA op-amps made the whole experience not only highly detailed but also quite organic and quite believable sounding. My usual blues collection didn't lack textures, there was still quite a lot of weight to that double bass, and violins were still sending a few shivers through my spine. This unit isn't offering very powerful leading edges, so forget about sharp contours of the notes. On the plus side, its slightly elevated bass and mid-range region made my music livelier, more believable sounding in a way. And I know that SMSL knows exactly the limitations of this particular silicone, and I'm glad that they didn't make it as dry and unevolving sounding as they did with SU-8S. And if you are thinking of getting that SU-8S that is cheaper, please add a little bit more and get the SU-9N instead, because it's considerably better sounding to me. When Incubus warning started playing, I immediately started humming and grooving all along, because it worked as magic for me. So its higher mid-range presence and a slight bump in the bass was exactly what I wanted to hear from an alternative rock track, and SU-9N just rendered that perfectly, and there is nothing more to add in here. Moving on to Soundstage, right off the bat I had that aha moment, because it didn't sound so big, so airy, so layered sounding to me compared to some higher priced DACs like VMV-D1 SE or D2. And if Soundstage is important to you, I suggest getting that slightly more expensive VMV-D1 SE. And while it didn't really limit the air travel in any way, I just felt that the sounds weren't really taking off, enveloping my entire body. And that was felt with loudspeakers and headphones alike. It offered a somewhat medium-sized soundstage, so not that big, not so small. It wasn't really upfront or claustrophobic sounding. And that was again very apparent with loudspeakers and headphones alike. But I've immediately remembered that, of course, its twin brother SU-9 performed more or less the same. On the plus side, its limited soundstage size sometimes could work to your advantage, depending on the music that you are listening to. For example, those gangster blues of Junior Wells that were recorded in 1965 weren't really made to sound great on headphones, because nobody was mastering for headphones at that time. So via headphones you have that super wide sound, but everything happens to your left, to your right, and really nothing in the middle. But with SU-9N, all those sounds just are coming much closer to you, and you have a more centered image, so there are a few sounds that are happening in the middle. So it doesn't sound so disjointed, it sounded More like applying a passive crossover filter, if that makes any sense. In the living room, it was clear to me that lacking a true preamp stage and a powerful capacitance just didn't push that sound that far away from me. But please understand that I'm exaggerating a little bit, but still the void spaces between the notes were still smaller and there was less air in the room. Moving on to frequency response, SU-9N, as its twin brother SU-9, will be delivering a stronger bass output, and that's really what differentiates them from a sea of entry-level delta sigma modulation converters. Personally, I find it more impressive in here, more powerful sounding compared to the SU-8S, and if you already prepared the funds for that device, please gather a little bit more and get the SU-9N instead, because it's considerably more impressive. So long story short, you'd be getting a clean, undistorted bass that's a little bit more powerful, a little bit more elevated, there is more substance and weight down low, and be it sub-bass or mid-bass, it got that in spades. Luckily, its mid-range delivery never felt dry or lifeless sounding to me. It was just by a hair more natural sounding compared to, say, a topping D50S. I didn't spot glare, I didn't spot listening fatigue. On the other way, it was a little fuller sounding, a little bolder sounding, reminding me a little about the sound of their VMVD1 SC that was going in the same direction. So a very pleasant effect with loudspeakers and headphones alike. And pairing it with some linear setups, with bright setups, wasn't really a challenge anymore because it was infusing a little bit more warmth, so I could easily pair it with THX, with NFCA amplifiers of topping that wasn't really that bad. It actually sounded quite good. And if you are still saving for an R2R ladder DAC, this unit can work as a temporary solution. Its treble delivery was quite extended, quite detailed, quite transparent sounding, so there weren't that super strong leading edges, as I was saying, so forget about sharpness. And the only thing that was missing the action was just brightness and listening fatigue. Overall, SU-9N, as its twin brother SU-9, warmish sounding sources, just offering a little bit more in the bass, a bigger mid-range density, at the cost of less treble presence. They weren't linear sounding, and maybe that is for the best, as sometimes music wants to be listened and enjoyed, not only analyzed. As for my conclusions, I don't know if you're aware, but SU-9 was pretty much the best-selling SMSL device to date. However, there is a very strong anti-MQA movement going right now, and I'm getting why that is happening. SMSL quickly responded to market demands, just removing that MQA decoder, that unnecessary UAT Bluetooth codec, while slashing $60 from its price point, making it again one of the hottest SMSL products for 2022. SMSL was able to transform a linear and uber-transparent chipset into a sweeter and smoother sounding digital creature, and I'm extremely happy experiencing such a complete package at such an affordable price. I don't believe you can get a higher performing DAC at $400, and that's why it just received my golden stamp of approval. Okay folks, I hope you enjoyed my review. Don't forget to subscribe, because at 10k subs I'll be giving away a brand new SU-9N. Until that happens, listen to more music, be positive, and I'll see you around.